Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you're watching this from. The next hour will be dedicated to our online event entitled Modern Governments for Effective Multilateralism, which is the kickoff, so to speak, for this year's annual meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We will be dividing the next hour into three blocks. First, we will hear from the Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann. Then we will have about half an hour for a panel discussion with different stakeholders involved with the AIIB. And last, there will be time for your questions, for audience questions. So if you have any questions, please use the question and answer button on the right-hand corner of this live stream page, and we will hopefully get to them towards the end of the hour. But first, we are honored to have with us the Secretary General and highest representative of a multilateral organization that's 10 times older than the AIIB. Mr. Cormann has been at the helm of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development as of March last year. Previously, he was Australia's finance minister. Mr. Cormann, we're delighted to have you, and we look forward to your remarks. The virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and it's great to be here. And I should say, as Australia's finance minister, I was part of the decision by the Australian government to join the AIIB some years ago. So thank you for the opportunity to join the conversation and to say a few words about the importance of multilateralism in today's challenging world, and of course, very much in the context of the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank's important mission. You are an important part of the multilateral architecture as we all seek to ensure sustainable long-term development and enhanced resilience in developing countries. And there remains so much work to be done on this front, and we truly need all hands on deck to help us reach our development objectives. Your annual meeting comes at a time of profound challenge and uncertainty in the global economy. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to lower growth, triggered a wave of inflation, and which is now becoming more and more broad-based. Energy and food prices are up. Households and businesses are faced with rapidly increasing costs, while food security in low-income countries in particular is at risk. And at the same time, measures in response to COVID-19 continue to disrupt supply chains in Asia with global consequences, in particular also for low and middle income countries. We must grapple with these pressures in the short term while laying the groundwork for the sustainable transition of our economies over the long run. And we must do so in a way that supports the growth aspirations of developing economies. This will require a massive amount of investment in growth, resilience, and structural transformation. And the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank has a critical role to play here in helping to mobilize the necessary investment. At the OECD, we estimate that around $6.9 trillion US will be needed each year through to 2030 to meet the Sustainable Development Goals in a way that is compatible with the objectives under the Paris Agreement. Collectively around the world, we are currently falling well short with spending, or investment, I should say, at around $3.4 to $4.4 trillion US. It's clear that no single country can make up this investment gap on its own, and no single government can tackle all of the related challenges, including the climate change and environmental sustainability challenge on its own. No single economy can meet the urgent need for critical goods and services created by crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic on its own. So it's self-evident that multilateral cooperation is essential in providing the collective responses required in response to our shared global challenges. Common standards, a core focus of the OECD's work, are important to help optimize the effectiveness of multilateral actions. They help ensure a globally better coordinated approach in terms of policy objectives, definitions of key concepts, implementation mechanisms, data collection, and indeed making sure that we optimize implementation. They also generate the necessary conversations on areas where countries could and should increase their level of ambition and effort. But let me highlight 3 areas of relevance to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank where multilateralism and international standards can help us improve outcomes. First, when it comes to improved donor coordination, it can help address challenges stemming from growing demands on the multilateral development system. The recent confluence of crises has stretched available resources. This year, the UN registered a record funding shortfall for humanitarian assistance of $31.4 billion US. At the same time, the multilateral development architecture is more crowded and fragmented than ever. More donor contributions are earmarked, limiting flexibility and putting pressure on multilateral development organizations to rely on new funding models, including private finance. The OECD can contribute to strengthening the multilateral development system by helping to develop a common set of good multilateral donor practices. Second point is that we must recognize that it's not just the amount of infrastructure investment that is important when it comes to the pursuit of our development goals, but also, and even more importantly, the quality of that investment. Common policy frameworks across governments and multilateral development banks, we believe, are needed to ensure investment is aligned with our shared objectives, including our shared climate and sustainability objectives. After all, the infrastructure investment decisions we make today will lock countries, including the bank's beneficiaries, into a long-term trajectory. We recognize your institution's commitment to aligning your operations with the objectives of the Paris Agreement by July 2023. The 2022 OECD recommendation on the governance of infrastructure also sets out the good practices to ensure value for money, integrity, and sustainability of infrastructure projects, and we commend it to you. We have developed a diagnostic tool, the indicators of the governance of infrastructure, to help countries evaluate their progress in implementing this recommendation. That will include an additional 8 Asia-Pacific countries by next year, in addition to OECD members and 11 Latin American and Caribbean countries. We're also working to promote harmonization across the many international initiatives in this space, such as the G7 Partnership on Global Infrastructure Investment, the European Union Global Gateway, and the Blue Dot Network. Third point is that recent crises have demonstrated the need to incorporate resilience explicitly into the work of multilateral institutions, including the work of development banks. This includes assessing the resilience of our own institutions. The OECD's Lessons in Multilateral Effectiveness project has collected studies on the response to recent crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we can be better prepared for the future. Resilience is also a valuable lens to apply to investment and development finance decisions. The OECD analysis found that approximately 1/4 of the world's population is exposed to risks that their government and communities lack the ability to manage, absorb, or mitigate. Our States of Fragility tool helps map these risks, allowing development institutions to prioritize and optimize their impact. Let me conclude with a word about governance, which I know is an important theme of your discussions today. Strong member oversight and transparency have been priorities of my time, as brief as it has been so far, 16, 17 months, my time as Secretary General of the OECD in leading this organization. And I believe, and we believe, this oversight is important for both the management of the organization and the quality of our outputs. This is an ongoing process, and we continue to identify opportunities to improve. And clearly that is a challenge for all international organizations, all multilateral organizations, to continue to focus on. I believe that high governance standards rooted in transparency, accountability, and adherence to member priorities are key to the success of multilateral organizations. There's a great deal counting on this success, including our ability to achieve our long-term development, sustainability, and resilience objectives. So as you focus on ways to optimize your contribution as part of our global development architecture, I encourage you to keep these stakes in mind today as you chart the future of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank's own governance framework. Thank you so much again for letting me join this conversation today, and I look forward to having a conversation with you now.
Well, thank you very much, Matthias. Thank you so much for your remarks. That was very interesting and very wide-ranging. Let me touch on a few points that you've made. First of all, I think you made a very convincing case that the world needs rules-based multilateralism to solve global challenges. And you mentioned yourself the COVID crisis, which is the epitome of a global challenge. How would you judge the state of this multilateralism looking at the case study of COVID?
Well, look, I mean, it's very sadly a statement of the obvious that the rules-based international system is under a severe strain. I mean, that was already the case before COVID. I got to say, I mean, rules-based trading system in particular was under strain, given some of the trade tensions that were playing out, in particular between the United States and China. COVID-19 brought its own challenges, in terms of global supply chains. And now we have a permanent member of the UN Security Council, which has the job of preserving and enforcing compliance with our rules-based international order, seeking to shift internationally recognized borders by the use of force in direct breach of international law. So, I mean, there's some severe challenges to the international rules-based order, yet it is so important for us to keep working to get it into a better shape. I mean, there are some good examples in recent times where it has worked. I mean, the OECD through the G20 and working through an inclusive framework with 140 countries and jurisdictions around the world was able to facilitate multilateral agreement on reforming our international tax system to make it fairer and work better in the context of a digitalized, globalized world economy. And we're in the process now of seeking to implement that reform. I mean, when you look at the challenge of climate change, I mean, self-evidently, it can only be addressed effectively if countries around the world come together and better coordinate and better align their efforts to ensure it can be genuinely globally effective. I mean, there's a whole range of other areas within which it is clearly important for countries to come together. I mean, I think in that context, the G20 is an important forum, but at the moment, right now, in the context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, I mean, a lot of these platforms are sadly under severe strain, and the world would be much better off if we had a return to a just peace for Ukraine as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. You also mentioned, this is a bit of a different strand now, you also mentioned the fragmentation of the multilateral development system. Forgive me for asking a bit of a provocative question. I mean, when you look at the AIIB, a fairly new institution, and we talk about fragmentation, is it part of the problem or is it part of the solution?
No, well, I mean, clearly, I mean, I see it very much part of the solution. I mean, it was a very substantial initiative by China some 8 or 9 years ago. And, as I say, I mean, I was part of a government in the past in Australia which decided to join and to support it. I mean, I guess, there is somewhat of a proliferation of development banks of different sizes. And, in the end, it's good that there is a lot of effort and a lot of goodwill, but I mean, I guess the point that I was trying to make is that to the extent that we have a proliferation of banks, of multilateral development banks of all sizes, it is important that we have a level of coordination and that we ensure a level of coherence as we work collectively to achieve the sustainable development objectives under the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We're ideas away from, and in recent years, including because of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we've been going backwards. So that there really is an important need for renewed effort and focus. And I guess the point I'm making is that there are always going to be limited resources. And to the extent that there are more and more players deploying a limited set of resources, we really need to do everything we can to optimize their impact. And that is where global cooperation and coordination comes in.
You also mentioned that the world is currently falling short of the investment needs that are out there. If you look in particular at the region of operation of the AIIB, if you look at Asia, where do you see the most pressing problems?
Well, look, I mean, across, the lowest income countries, the least developed countries in particular, have got very, very severe needs. And, in terms of the sort of necessary infrastructure development to give them the best possible opportunity to succeed in a global marketplace. I think the AIIB is best placed to identify the specific priority areas of focus for its operation. But I think that if you look across the world, including across Asia, and you look at some of the desperate and urgent needs of the least developed economies around the world, there is a lot that can and a lot that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. My last question to you is really about the OECD. And I think you mentioned yourself the important role that the OECD plays as a coordinator of development activity and also as a standard setter. Yet the OECD as an institution does not include the BRICS countries and other emerging economies. Do you think that brings a legitimacy problem?
Well, clearly, the OECD was set up as a organization bringing together like-minded market-based democracies who share a commitment to democracy, the rule of law, human rights, market-based economic principles, but also a rules-based international order. But when it comes to policy issues, when it comes to global cooperation, when it comes to facilitating the best possible solution to our shared challenges, I think the OECD has also demonstrated a very important pragmatism and a capacity to work inclusively with countries all around the world. That is what we did in relation to tax through the Development Center. We do that in the context of development. And that is what we're also seeking to do when it comes to climate through our recent initiative for an inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches, where we want to bring advanced, emerging and developing economies together to share information and data about their efforts to reduce emissions, but also, pursue the conversation on how we can better coordinate policy actions in individual jurisdictions to optimize the impact at a global level.
Thank you so much, Matthias. Thank you for also asking questions about your own institution. I think that was really very interesting. Thank you for being with us. We will now move to the second part of this webinar, which is a panel with stakeholders from the many different groups involved in the AIIB. Let me now introduce to you the panelists. We have with us Professor Nairi Woods. Nairi is a member of the AIIB's International Advisory Panel. She's a foremost expert on international financial institutions and serves as inaugural dean of the Blavatnik School of Government and professor of global economic governance at the University of Oxford. We have with us Ms. Quang Ha. Ha is Deputy Director General of the Department for International Cooperation of the State Bank of Vietnam, and she was, until this summer, Director of a constituency of shareholders in the AIIB, so knows the institution really well. We also have with us Francesca Utili. Francesca is Head of International Financial Relations in the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Italy in Rome. Francesca is involved in a number of international financial institutions, always representing Italy. And last but not least, we have Ludger Schuttknecht. Ludger is Vice President and Corporate Secretary at the AIIB. He also acted as the Chief Negotiator for Germany in the founding of the AIIB, making him one of the architects and one of the drafters of its Articles of Agreement. Now, welcome to you all. We will first have a round of opening questions and then discuss some challenges facing the AIIB. But let me start with an opening question to Nairi. Nairi, the AIIB is still a fairly young institution. What scorecard would you give it if you were, think about it as a child of 6 years old, just starting out in school, but already time for the first report? Has it achieved what it set out to do?
Thank you, Frederica. I'm going to give the AIIB 8 out of 10. Let's go back to 2016 and think about the doubts that people had about this institution. Would it get members? Yes. It's now got 105 members. So that shows it's got buy-in from around the world. So that's a high mark right there. Second, people worried that it would degrade development standards and development lending standards. Actually, the ambition of the president to have a lean, clean, green bank has been pretty much borne out. It's very aligned with World Bank standards, thanks to the diligence and hard work of the staff. I note that in 2021, 88% of its lending was aligned with its green infrastructure ambition. So that's pretty good. I think a third thing was, would it function well as a multilateral? And multilateral banks, if we're honest, have problems. They have boards which try to micromanage every loan. They have a problem of accountability, because who is it that's really making the lending decision? Is it all countries trading off with each other, or is it an effective technocratic management? The AIIB has tried something bold on that. It's delegating some decisions to the management. It's overseeing the president and the quality of management, and it's doing pretty well. It's dispersed some, to 33 countries, 190 projects, some $36 billion worth of lending. So that's pretty good. And it's been very adaptable. It's responded to COVID with a new facility, which has dispersed a lot of money since COVID. That said, I think so far no AIIB loans have reached more than 20% of their disbursement. So now there are some challenges, not unlike those of other multilateral development banks, of actually getting the money out the door, getting the projects actually to completion, and ensuring they work. But overall, it's a pretty good start through very difficult terrain, both geopolitical pressures, COVID. There's a lot of headwinds that this young bank has met over its first 6 years. It's doing pretty well.
Thank you so much, Nairi. If my children brought home 8 out of 10 every time, I would be very pleased. Ludger, as one of this is a bit of a wrong analogy, but, as someone who was involved in the setting up of the bank, as a parent, if I may. So what is the view from inside the bank now? Do you think the governance model is working?
Thank you, Frederica, and thank you also, Nairi. Many of the points you've made, I think, speak very much from my heart as well. We're indeed a young institution, and we have learned a lot, but there is still also a lot to learn for us. The large number of countries, the good project development, the fact that we are well accepted in the MDB family, we are a well-respected member, I think is a good thing. And, I joined the bank 1.5 years ago. I was responsible also for supervising the bank when I was still in the Ministry of Finance. And if I would not have joined if I didn't have faith in the bank. And what I saw when I came here is in line with that, a young institution with challenges going forward, but I think with a good record so far. And our AAA rating reflects not only sound finances, it also reflects, as you may know, the rating agencies, they also look at the governance of the bank. And that governance is judged by outsiders to be a strong one. And so I think that both inside and with our shareholders and our clients, we are on a good path. Maybe if I can briefly comment on a few features of our governance that I think our audience might interest. Nairi mentioned the fact that, we have a clearer separation of responsibility than some of our peers, to learning from them, actually, by, having the board focus on strategic and policy issues while the bank deals with the management of the bank. And on top, we have a non-resident board. That means the shareholders are not permanently seated inside the bank, and that makes it also easier to pursue such an approach. And it saves a lot of money, to be honest. And we are also committed to sustainable banking. That means that our projects unless there is concessional finance involved, but on the regular basis, they have to earn their return. So they have to be high quality projects. And we have promised to our shareholders not to go back to them every couple of years with demands for more money. So this principles laid down in our articles of agreement of a sustainable bank that is that also doesn't always ask for new money makes us, I think, more conducive to be lean. And the last point that is relevant also for the 21st century very much. I mean, our shareholder structure. Our shareholder structure is roughly 25% of the votes for advanced countries, about a quarter for China, and the rest for mostly Asian advanced and emerging economies. So in that sense, it's different from at least the other big MDBs. And here in this environment, we have most of our very important decisions are supermajority decisions, which require 75% majority of the votes. So no group can dominate in our bank, which makes, first of all, the high standards of our articles of agreement hard to change, but it also means that we all have to work together to forge consensus, to agree and work towards the high reputation of the bank, and nobody can really work against that. So I think it makes us a good base, a good model for a 21st century bank that also takes into account of the reality that, you know, the economic weights in the world have somewhat shifted over recent decades.
Thank you, Ludger. That is very interesting indeed, the view from inside. Now we are shifting to the outside again, and my next question is to Ha. So what is the view from an emerging country such as Vietnam? You're both a client and a shareholder. Is the AIIB delivering for Vietnam, Ha?
Sorry. Thank you very much for the question. It's actually very interesting that I will ask that question, because that's exactly what we have to ponder upon at least every year when we prepare the reports on our participation in international organization in general and MDBs in particular. I will split my answer into two parts. As shareholders, we acknowledge, and as a founding member, we feel proud that AIIB has made important achievement in expanding both its membership and the activity. And I think that Nairi has already mentioned some of that. After only 6 years in operation, AIIB has nearly doubled its members from 57 to more than 100. And by the end of third quarter of this year, the approved portfolio of the bank reached 190 projects worth more than $36 billion for borrowers from 33 countries. Bank's products and activities has been expanded, covering all sectors within the infrastructure spectrum. Furthermore, besides providing financing to its member developments of infrastructure project, AIIB has been swift and efficient in making adjustment internally in responding to the changing environment, which is important to ensure the bank's resilience and sustainability, both operationally and financially, and the bank's contribution to the joint efforts of the MDBs in supporting members in this very difficult environment. We also acknowledge that AIIB pay attention to develop and facilitate its learning culture. We consider this culture very important for a young institution that wants to be innovative like AIIB, and strongly encourage AIIB to continue its efforts in this regard. If there is something that we would expect AIIB to do more as a shareholder, and I think I have mentioned this to the management when I was a member of the board of directors, is that while trying to support countries' emerging needs, AIIB should ensure that its activities are focused on the core mandate, which is to support members' development of infrastructure projects. We are a lean and a small bank. We would do better if we are more focused. Secondly, as a client, AIIB has been swift in meeting the changing and urgent demands of the member countries. When COVID-19 outbroke, AIIB was among the first to offer the CIF, the Crisis Response Facility, for members being affected by the pandemic. The facility has been reviewed and revised regularly and timely as demand change. That for us show the agility of AIIB in terms of operation and its responsibility to the member. At the same time, while we acknowledge that the project procedure in general is efficient and the bank staff work very hard with borrowers to develop and implement the projects, I think that the needs and specific circumstances of the member countries should be taken into consideration better. In more particular, AIIB should consider to offer more accommodative borrowing costs for lower income member countries. In this regard, we highly acknowledge the establishment of the special fund window, but more needs to be done. Technical assistance to help members meet the project requirement, especially the ENS, the environmental and social standards of the bank, need to be provided, and relevant support to member countries' gradual and sustained transition to the green energy or Paris alignment is also very important. As both role a shareholder and a client, I generally see that the valuable assets of the bank, that is the strongly committed management and the highly qualified and diligent staff. We believe that with those factors, the bank will continue to deliver what is expected to achieve by us as a shareholder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ha. Thank you for these opening remarks from Vietnam. And my last opening question is to Francesca from Italy. You're representing a G7 country. From your point of view, is the capital invested in the Italian shareholding in the AIIB put to good use?
Thanks for your question, and let me begin by thanking the AIIB for this opportunity to discuss such a relevant topic. To start with, I can say that the bank works for Italy as it maintains a constant dialogue with shareholders to assure quality and timely discussions on strategic issues, and it is open to continuous enhancements of its organizational setting. You know that Italy has supported the institution since its inception and looks forward to continuous engagement. And indeed, looking at current positive developments in terms of growth, we believe that the AIIB can further exploit its potential, building on the significant experience and value added, which is brought by those member countries like Italy and EU countries that have been important players in shaping the current multilateral system, particularly in terms of operational, environmental, and social standards. Those standards must remain stepping stones of the activity on which a successful development institution builds its presence and its relevance. In relation to the capital invested, it will be important that the AIIB is able to keep calibrating on its own governance structure, its risk assessment and management capability, and its ability to develop and exploit its excellent human capital potential, to which we are pleased to contribute. At the same time, the bank should maintain a high pro-development profile in the project it supports and a cautious approach towards investments with a purely financial nature, where the degree of effective control of the use of its funds is delegated to complex financial management structures. I believe that it's now important that the bank maintains its well-shaped investment portfolio and its well-established positioning on the international financial markets, as recognized by the prestigious AAA standalone rating. We expect the bank to continue minimizing the cost of carrying additional liquidity and having a very attentive asset and liability management to maintain its high rating, especially in this moment of global turbulences. Finally, let me mention that the Italian industry and the service sector look with ever-increasing interest at expanding their presence in Asia. The Italian economy is capable of supplying innovative solutions and is leader in several sectors which strongly relate with the broad infrastructure development that can help AIIB to contribute to a sustainable, balanced, and inclusive, long-lasting growth of the region.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you so much. That concludes the first round of questions. We've agreed that we would now look at specific challenges facing the AIIB, and I will ask you questions accordingly. The first question is for first Ha and then Ludger, if I can ask you for shortish answers about COVID and the importance of building trust when a new institution is set up, and face-to-face interactions are obviously very important for building that trust. Unfortunately, the early years, so to speak, the kindergarten years of the AIIB fell together with COVID. How much has the pandemic held back the trust building, the institutional maturity, the maturing process in the AIIB? First Ha and then Ludger. Please unmute.
Thank you. It is of no question that COVID-19 has negative impacts on communication and interaction of the bank, not to mention the bank operation, especially project development, implementation, and monitoring. Actually, it's not quite easy for me to assess how much the pandemic has held back AIIB in a broader sense. Let me narrow down my answer to the relation and interaction of the board of directors to be more relevant. If I can calculate the impact of AIIB on AIIB, maybe as much as what other peer institutions have experienced, as COVID-19 spared no one from its damage, plus the fact that the bank is headquartered in Beijing, which is now still subject to travel restriction, but minus the element that AIIB has a non-resident board, where our day-to-day face-to-face interaction is in nature partly virtual already. We have more online board meetings, more policy change, and more investment proposals to be considered and approved. The board, as for management and staff, had to work around the clock, and for us, the board, it is sometimes literally means 24/7, given the fact that being the board member is a part-time job for all of us. Virtual meetings may have also discouraged us from sharing more than what we have planned to intervene before the meetings. No formal chat at coffee breaks. Actually, there was no coffee break, no lunch or dinner together. Even our fireside chat with the president were held virtually. So for sure, there was minus effect to the communication among board members and between the board and the management. But at least for me, I don't think there was some ruining effect on the trust building. The bank has been very agile and efficient in adoption of technology to facilitate meetings and later on project monitorings. More frequent, even urgent meetings and calls between the board members and management have been arranged at either side's request. I think that it is not via what means we communicate, it is how we communicate and how timely the provision of information and open the exchange of view is that decides the level of trust. We made quite a number of important decisions to the bank's operation during that time. And of course, virtually tens of meeting sessions was held for those decisions. I think the pandemic has required us to be more confident in ourselves in delegating and trusting the management and staff. If there was evidence that the held back effect was not serious, I would use the comprehensive review of the accountability framework taking place in April this year as an example. While we discussed deeply and extensively about the review, and we did disagree on some assessment, we agreed to continue the level of delegation we intended to give the management at the beginning when the framework was formed. That is a form of trust, between the board and the management. Having said that, I still look forward to having face-to-face interaction with the bank, its management, its staff, our fellow constituency members and board members, even when the trust is already been there. Thank you.
Ludger?
Thank you, Frederica, and thank you, Ha. I think I can follow up on this very easily. Indeed, I mean, it is clear that the pandemic has not made life easier for us. I mean, you can only go so far in monitoring projects through the use of consultants or drones or other substitutes. But now we have established a hub in the UAE from which we will be able to compensate for some of these shortcomings and make travel, client relations, project monitoring, etc. easier. But let me just mention two examples how here also in such a challenging situation with COVID, our governance, I think, has proven itself. The first one is we were very quick and agile to react to COVID with the establishment of our crisis support facility. And, you know, our bank is the only one where the board actually evaluates the president. And without breaching confidentiality rules, I can say so much that the board, our directors, our shareholders have appreciated this quick reaction and by the president, by the management. And through this evaluation, we know about this. We have a dialogue about it, and that's a good thing. So the crisis required us to react quickly, and this happened then in a good dialogue with the board. And Ha mentioned the review of our governance that in a way is an ongoing process, and we have institutionalized elements, but we are now actually engaged in a dialogue very much under the guidance of our directors to further develop our governance. So I would say this trust-based model that we have, where management is trusted with management and board is doing the strategy and policy, is showing exactly that it is working, this modern governance structure. But let me also say that I agree with Ha that we are planning to move back to physical meetings as of March, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, both of you. Let me take the opportunity to remind the audience that there is the possibility to submit questions. You just click on the Q&A button on your screen. We have some questions coming in, but please feel free to submit more. In the meanwhile, I'd like to turn to Nairi and mention another challenge, not just for the AIIB, but for all MDBs, really. That's stakeholder plurality. I mean, the AIIB, like others, has to balance the interests of a large number of stakeholder groups. I mean, there are shareholders, there are client countries, private sector, other international financial institutions. From your point of view, that is a bit sort of drilling down into the report you've given the bank so far. Where is it working well, and where is there work to do?
Thank you, Frederica. Look, I'd stand back first and say Matthias Cormann, questioned whether a proliferation of multilateral development banks is a good thing, or whether we should be cautious about that. Are we cluttering the landscape of development financing? And on that, my answer is it is a good thing to have another multilateral development bank. I think in a world which is fragmenting quickly, we need more institutions in which a large number of countries come together to speak and to cooperate. Particularly in the face of global challenges like climate and the pandemic. And I think that the AIIB works not as a stumbling block, but as a real building block to better cooperation. These institutions create in each of their member states a habit of cooperation, a habit of speaking to each other, and we need more of that in the world and not less. It also means that there is competition among multilaterals, and that might not be welcome in some corners. I personally believe that competition is what keeps human enterprises nimble and agile and at their best game. So that competition, I think, is good. And it gives some choice to borrowers, which I think is also important, that for a borrowing country, as Ha spoke about from the perspective of Vietnam, it's good to be able to choose which organization. Now, Ha mentioned that she'd like to see, as a borrower, it would be good to see more technical assistance from the bank, for example, on meeting its environmental standards. So just picking up on that, I think to your question, Frederica, that one of the things that the AIIB could do to improve relations with stakeholders, or one of the reasons why stakeholders is important, is because an absolute golden rule of development financing is that projects will work best when they are owned by the communities in which they're being built. That's to say they're understood as a priority and they're felt to be a priority within the community, and it's got the community's support and engagement. And I think the reason why the AIIB will want to keep working on developing really good frameworks for engaging local communities, local stakeholders, local private sector organizations, is because that's going to give the projects that it's funding the best chance of success. And many governments are still in early stages of learning how best to communicate with different parts of a community, often parts of communities which disagree with one another. And there, I think a multilateral development bank can come in with a cool head and with an experience of all different multilaterals on how to do this best and provide a really useful framework. So I think the AIIB is doing very well with its different government stakeholders. It'll do even better when it can bring them together in person and build trust. It's beginning to work and develop relationships with the private sector. It needs to do more of that. The bank's aware of that. It's working hard on it. And it can now begin to think about what's the framework for local community relations.
Thank you, Nairi. Thank you so much. The next challenge that I'd like to throw into the frame is learning from peers. I mean, we heard how the AIIB has a very distinct and in many ways innovative setup as a fairly young institution. But Francesca, this is a question for you as someone who also engages with other MDBs and other IFIs. What do you think the AIIB can learn from older institutions?
Thanks, Frederick. And being innovative as the bank is not only about new products, but it is also about having the ability to act as a facilitator for enhanced collaboration among regional and bilateral financial institutions. So in all fora, Italy has been advocating the idea that MDBs should not be seen as individual institutions competing for scarce resources, but instead as a system which would be able to deliver a transformative impact where each institution can build on its competitive advantage. AIIB in particular has moved fast to establish itself as an important emerging actor in the MDB's family, strengthening ties with the multilateral community through active coordination and as a key catalyzer of economic development in the region. Cross-border infrastructure projects and networks involve several countries and face specific challenges as they are by nature more complex and for which high coordination among MDBs is crucial. In all contexts, AIIB has well integrated the international financial architecture while maintaining its innovative business approach to infrastructure financing and a culture of lean, green, clean, which could be inspirational for other MDBs. So what I would say is the bank should continue seeking an open and effective collaboration with other multilateral and bilateral developing institutions and further contribute to strengthen the existing infrastructure financial landscape, spurring innovation in the development of infrastructure as an asset class. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are already advancing in time and we will soon have time for the audience questions. But as a sort of quick fire round, kind of closing the official part of the panel, I would like to ask each of you now in turn to give me a very short answer, 3 sentences max. I'll keep counting. And maybe we start with Ha. How would you improve the AIIB going forward? And once Ha has had her turn, maybe we can move seamlessly round the clock, so to speak, and then go to Francesca, Nairi, and Ludger last. But Ha, so to you first, how would you improve the AIIB going forward in 3 sentences?
Yes, I have 3 sentences for that. First, stay focused on the infrastructure and on the reason. Second, be diversified in all sense and aspect could be staff, projects, gender, professional background, geographies. And lastly, the third one, AIIB is still very young. As shareholder, we should be patient and supportive to make sure the bank going the direction we envisage. We also need to be consistent as parents. Thank you.
Francesca?
Okay, thanks. So I would focus on continue working on becoming a leading employer among multilateral institutions, attracting best talents. Second, maintain high quality of investment as the portfolio grows. And third, even more efficiency in procedures and transparency for project finance loans.
Thank you, Nairi.
So the bank's there to serve some of the neediest people in the world and to forge cooperation. So it needs first get the funding out the door and get projects completed so that they serve those people. And second, really bring the countries of the world together in its board, in its staff, in its meetings, be a real forum for trust building among countries and cooperation.
Thank you, Ludger.
Thanks, Friederike. And for all this to be achieved, I would say we need to focus on three things. I mean, the first one, as young institution, needs to focus on internal capacity building. We still have a lot of work to do there. The second is, of course, if we want to deliver on our mandate with high standards, we also need to work with our clients and our stakeholders to stay competitive and to stay in line with our mandate. And the final thing is, that's the theme of this session. I mean, is to keep the integrity of our governance. It's ultimately the governance. It's governance in our countries, in companies, and in MDBs that determines the quality of the outcome and the future, delivery on the objectives. So I think on that one, we also need to stay on course, but I'm quite confident that we will.
Thank you so much. I like the brevity. I think there was a lot to take notes on, and I think hope everyone listening in was taking notes, and these good wishes for the AIIB and sort of learning objectives were taken on board. Now, I have some questions from the audience, actually, and there are a couple relating to climate change, and I will address them together. And I was wondering who in the panel would like to reply to that. I think maybe Ludger, as Corporate Secretary, is best placed here. Is the AIIB doing enough to support global efforts on climate change? And is it doing enough to help developing countries adapt to climate change? From your point of view, Ludger, what are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is, in terms of what we do as institutions, of course, the key question as regards, contributing to global public goods, mastering the impending climate crisis. That's the key. Now, we have already in our articles of agreement with our value of green, I think we are predetermined to take this we were predetermined to take this very seriously already when the discussion started. Now, in our corporate strategy, we have committed ourselves to do 50% of our financing by 2025 to deal with the climate challenges. And last year, we already reached 48. So I think we will get well beyond that. And that objective is very much in line with our peers. And we have various instruments, including Paris alignment that Matthias mentioned at the beginning, and on the financing side as well to actually do this. Now, the question also referred to not just to mitigation, that is reducing carbon emissions and thereby enhancing the chances of getting to net zero, but also adaptation, how we make our economies more resilient towards the challenges. And here the poorest countries are often the most at risk and most at threat. And here the share of financing that goes to adaptation clearly has to increase. But also that we have recognized, we are in our corporate strategy implementation framework, bureaucracies, organizations always have to have acronyms and nice words. We are planning to also increase the share of adaptation-related finance. And we are working on buying in, on drawing in contributors and cooperation partners, not only in the MDB world, but also in the private sector. We are part of the most important global networks for supporting the financing of climate change. So I think institutionally, we are on a good course to support this objective as part of the MDB family.
Thank you, Ludger. Another question that has come in is about expanding the lending or the region of operation of the AIIB. So the question, I read it, is what is the plan to invest out of Asia and why? You're already lending to some Eastern European countries. What is the ultimate plan there? And to save Ludger from answering everything, maybe I'll address this question to Francesca as a shareholder, important shareholder from Europe. Where do you see the AIIB investing in the future, sort of out of Asia? Is that a direction you would be welcoming?
Well, I think that we should put this question in the context of what I was saying on MDBs working as a system and having a specific competitive advantage which should need to be fully exploited, and the specific characteristic of the bank of being a lean, clean, and green, and its specific structure, its agility and flexibility could be of interest also if they are put in place in other areas. So I think that in general, one should really try to keep a very strong connection and try to exploit in the best way possible all the possible synergies that several institutions can have when they work together. So even if it has not been at the center of our attention now, I think that one cannot exclude that those type of dynamics could also happen in the future. So that would be an areas of interest.
Can I come in briefly, Federico?
Of course, Ludger, please.
Yeah. No, I think Francesca is very right. I mean, one has to look at the multilateral framework here, on the cooperation, on the comparative advantages. And I mean, for us, we do have almost global membership, but we still have said we focus on Asia. Only up to 15% of our financing is non-regional, but for our global membership, for global public goods, and for connectivity to Asia, it does make sense that we also finance outside Asia. And we usually or mostly do this also in co-financing. So we do it, as Francesca says, in collaboration with the broader MDB community and also national financial institutions.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. It's a fairly specific question addressed to Ludger. So this is for you again. Could Ludger please comment on progress aligning the AIIB with the World Bank and the ADB in terms of the environmental and social framework? How aligned are you, and are there any challenges?
I would say this is actually another innovation of our bank that I have not commented on, but that is innovative and maybe is something that others could copy as well. And that is, how do we treat each other's social and environmental and governance standards? These standards are really essential for delivering high quality infrastructure for helping with institution building in our members. And I must say that we are very much aligned with the main MDB players, with all high standard players, also national institutions like the Cassa in Italy or KfW in Germany. And we can even, and we do in our co-finance projects, accept and basically adopt the environmental, social, and governance standards of our partner institutions to save money, to save time, to save our clients undue multiple due diligence, as it is called, so excessive bureaucracy basically in project finance. And so I think, and we could also move towards more agreements in this regard. We are currently discussing with KfW whether we can have mutual recognition. But I think this shows very much that we are taking this very seriously. I think this is an important question from the stakeholder community and from the client community, where we are in constant communication. But I would also say that here, our approach is in line and with the highest standards of our community.
Great. Okay. I think we are now out of time for another audience question. I'm really sorry for those whose questions haven't been picked up. There are a couple more, but we are already moving into the last minute. So This only really leaves me time to conclude our seminar, Building Modern Governance for Effective Multilateralism. I'd like to thank our speakers and panelists for their contributions, and you in the audience for your attention and also for the questions. I very much hope you found the last hour as entertaining and as enriching as I did. And I very much wish the AIIB all the best for the future. It's only really starting out in its school career, so to speak. Very promising start. All the best for the future. Thank you all for joining and have a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.